Hello. Today we will be looking at the cognitive components of giftedness. This is a mini lecture to help you understand the articles that were assigned for this topic. I will be focusing on the lecture looking at the articles by Dr. David Lohman and Dr. Susan Asseline. These were quite intense articles, and I hope that the little mini lecture will help you see how they relate to one another and better understand them. These are important topics to look at because the cognitive abilities, or what's happening in the brain, is the most important part of understanding how giftedness works. So we're going to look at theories of intelligence and how it affects student learning. The big part of Dr. Lohman's article is looking at aptitude. Aptitude describes what the student is ready to learn in a particular situation. It starts with your propensity, and then based on motivation and cognitive ability, you develop aptitudes for things. If propensities are innate, one might ask, how can we determine aptitude? Aptitude can be inferred by two different ways. One are tasks, and the other is the speed in which they learn. It's critical to remember, though, it's all based on the situation that the student is in. Dr. Asseline reminds us that Galton was the first to describe intelligence as something that could be measured. Spearman came along and talked about G. In 1916, Terman came up with the word gifted instead of genius. And in 1938, Thurston had the idea that there's more than one type of intelligence. Based on the work of the previous researchers, individual tests were developed to measure intelligence in people. We call a test norm reference if it's compared to a group of people that are similar to those being tested. These are some of the more popular intelligence tests that are used. I say used, but the Gardner theory of multiple intelligences is not used because it's not been scientifically or empirically proven, so it's not really a test. This diagram may look intimidating, but it shouldn't. At the top, you'll see Spearman's G, that general theory of intelligence. And then what we're seeing here are that general intelligence can be broken down into very specific components. These are things like language and mathematics. Continue on looking at that diagram. Down at the bottom are the more narrow abilities. These are the ones that we can measure through intelligence tests. And so by looking at those tests, we can infer what overall G may be. Measured, or we can't develop programs for it. G is important because it controls everything else, but it's not super important. It's not the be-all and end-all. In 1972, the U.S. Department of Education published the Marland Report, which gave our very first federal definition of giftedness. Many states have either adopted this or made edits to it to create their own definition of giftedness. The second part of this definition is really important to us because it notes that differentiated instruction is necessary for gifted students, that the general classroom instruction is not sufficient for them, and that establishes the need for gifted programming. This is a really interesting part of the report that we don't talk about too often. Actually, I just became aware of it. But it's really important to note that the government back in '72 noted that without specific supports, gifted students could suffer psychological damage. This part of the report and the definition is what some states use to combine gifted education with special education, because it recognizes, like the Two Tails of the Normal Curve article does, that both groups of students have special needs. After the Marland Report, in 1993, the U.S. government looked to see how we were doing on gifted education. The results were dismal at best. This helped some program reminds us that there are really two groups of gifted students. The first are high achievement, our typical gifted students. The other are high potential, those who have the aptitude but have not yet had the instruction or the opportunity to develop those aptitudes. A super important contribution by noting that many minority and high poverty students won't have had the same opportunities as others. He recommends using local norms, which is comparing students to others who have similar backgrounds and have had similar opportunities to learn, to find gifted students. Dr. Lohman helps us think about the needs of the high accomplishment versus high potential students and how we might meet them in gifted programming. Clearly, they both need something different. I know there was a lot of material, both in the articles and what we went over quickly here. These are the three main takeaways. I thought I should share with you what the real Dr. Lohman and Dr. Asseline look like. I hope this video has been helpful. Remember, if you ever have questions, comments, or you just want to talk about the things we're reading, feel free to email me anytime. And of all the factors we looked at in intelligence, I think you have the best one, the awesome factor.